Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, America's #1 trusted resource for realtors who demand authentic, real-time coaching. Starring award-winning real estate coaches Tim and Julie Harris. Get ready for unfiltered, full-strength honesty about what is truly working to get you into action and make you money in this new real estate boom. Now to our hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back to Real Estate Coaching Radio, and this is a very special edition of Real Estate Coaching Radio. We have a special announcement, something that we've been asked to literally embargo, a story that we've been asked to sit on from one of our, I'd say our friends in the industry, Move.com. And Mr. Ventura, our producer, is going to share a little bit of the backstory and how we came up with this story, how, basically everything that led up to us being able to break this news to all of you. And Mr. Ventura, are you on the line?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Tim. This is a story that we were asked to hold back on for a little while, and I think part of the reason is the complexity involved with this. This is definitely a story that has kind of a lot of twists and turns in it, as we're going to learn more about today. And so I'm really pleased to announce that tomorrow we will be having Celeste Starchild, the general manager of ListHub, on the show to discuss this in detail herself. But today, what I would like to announce, and what you and Julie will definitely have just an interesting time discussing, is an announcement of an industry letter just released today by ListHub that describes the failure of negotiations with Zillow to renew the listing syndication contract and provides additional details on what it means for ListHub, Zillow, and the industry. Now, in this case, it appears that they're attempting to set the record straight and correct any mistaken impressions that the public might have about their negotiations with Zillow. So we're going to go through what we know as the latest news on this breaking news story and discuss what it means to the industry.
That's right. And as always, this is Real Estate Coaching Radio, and our focus is on delivering information that's practical, that can you guys can use to help others and make money. So as much as this is sort of a top-line story, because it really is, it is relevant because after all, I mean, essentially where your buyer leads come from, a lot of your listing leads come from, are all intertwined with this story. So here's how we're going to run the show today, guys. Of course, my lovely wife, Julie, is on. Julie?
Hi, guys. Pleasure to be here as always.
Okay, great. So, Tim, you wrote an intro. I think you may have just covered it, and Julie's got the talking points that we've thus far. And, guys, we were just given this press release, like literally, a half hour before the show, Tim?
Yeah, we just got this.
Okay, so let's go through the talking points. And, Julie, while you're reading the points that Tim's already pulled out for us, I know Tim is still reading some other stuff, so he can then, if he finds anything relevant, also bring it to our attention. So let's kind of blaze through the talking points, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of, I think, draw a circle around the ones that are extra important that might be most readily relevant to our agents, MLSs, and brokers that are listening in. Make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. So feel free to jump in and interrupt me if you need to, if you want me to stop on a particular point. But as our producer said, there are lots of twists and turns here, so I'm going to go through these bullet points. This might be something for our listeners to just jot down the high points so you can follow along the story. A lot has occurred here, so I'm going to jump into these bullet points. On January 6th, Zillow's Chief Revenue Officer, Greg Schwartz, said, "We've not been able to come to terms with News Corp, that the ListHub agreement will most definitely expire," according to Inman News. According to Inman, quote, "he declined to elaborate further on negotiations between the two companies." So then the same day, again, January 6th, Zillow announced the launch of a new, quote, data dashboard, which is a listing management and reporting platform that the company says puts more control over listings in the hands of MLS members and brokers. So giving more control using that data dashboard to MLS members and brokers, which are most of our listeners here. So hopefully you guys are paying attention to this story. The next point, the story was framed as ListHub cutting off Zillow based on the Inman story titled, quote, "Rupert Murdoch playing hardball with Zillow," unquote. And quotes from the story like, "There's been a long speculation that ListHub, which is owned by Realtor.com operator Move, Inc., might cut off the flow of listings to rival sites like Zillow and Trulia." Well, so that leads to the next point. After the current ListHub syndication agreement expires
but Julie,
on April
let's
7th. Yes.
Julie, let me clarify something there.
Sure.
Sorry for interrupting you. So what's worth mentioning, and what I think that Move is wanting to put on the record, or ListHub is rather wanting to put out there, is that, and Tim, you're the one that's been, putting the story together, is that Move didn't essentially just cancel the agreement. ListHub, Move guys, remember ListHub is owned by Move. They didn't just simply cancel the agreement and say, okay, we're cutting off listing data to Zillow. It didn't happen like that, correct?
Yeah, and it is interesting because looking at this, I mean, it seems pretty obvious from that Inman story title and then the takeaway that I had from the quote. It looks like ListHub, our initial impression was ListHub is cutting them off, and so it looks like today's response is basically trying to set the record straight on that.
That's right. So in other words, just to be clear, it's evident that ListHub is going on the record and Move is going on the record by saying Zillow walked away from the negotiation table. ListHub didn't just simply say we're not renewing, correct?
Yeah, and I think Julie still has a couple of talking points left on that where
okay,
that details a little bit more.
Yeah, no worries. Well, so after the current ListHub syndication agreement actually expires on April 7th of this year, ListHub will no longer provide listings to Zillow. That's, I believe, an established fact at this point, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Those brokers, though, who wish to continue providing their content to Zillow must establish their own agreements and technology solution to support any future relationship with Zillow. So they're throwing it back to the brokers to populate that. And again, this is based on April 7th when the agreement expires. Now, let's fast forward to today. ListHub released today a, quote, industry letter regarding this story that completely changes our understanding of the story as we've been talking about. According to their letter, written by ListHub General Manager Celeste Starchild, and again, Celeste will be on the show tomorrow, so she can continue this discussion. So according to the industry letter written by Celeste of ListHub, Zillow actually chose to back out of the renewal agreement negotiations with ListHub voluntarily. Now, according to this same industry letter, ListHub had been continuing to negotiate in good faith with Zillow to renew the listing syndication agreement under a set of terms that they've posted online for review. So in the industry letter, ListHub also reaffirms that it will, quote, continue to perform listing distribution to all the other websites that we support today. And again, Tim, you'll be having Celeste Starchild from ListHub on tomorrow, and I'm sure that you'll be getting into this even more deeply and answering some of those questions. So that's a good time to drill down on some of these big unanswered questions in the story, which would be what? I mean, what is this causing industry-wide? Why do we care so much about this story?
The big question is, and we've yet to get this answered, and I've personally, those of you guys who have been following this story, you guys know I've been trying to get, going to different sources to get the bottom line on this. It was Inman who a couple times, and I think the latest, most recent time rather, was September, October, maybe December of last year, had a quote from a ListHub executive saying that something like 60 or 63%, I believe it was, of all the listings appearing on Zillow were provided by ListHub. So the big question is whether that is still true. Oh, obviously after April it's going to be zero. But I'm curious personally, how long, is it possible that Zillow will be able to replace all the listings, assuming that 60 or 63% number was accurate? Is it possible that they'll be able to replace all those listings lost at the expiration of the ListHub contract in April? I mean, that's really the big question.
Right.
And what are the ramifications if they don't? If they don't, those of you guys who are buying leads, it's called, Zillow obviously calls it buying impressions, which it is, but you guys are buying impressions for the sake of getting buyer leads, so I just call it buying leads. For those of you who are buying leads, what happens if all of a sudden your area does not have the same level of exposure? Most markets there's multiple MLSs, and what if Zillow has an agreement, maybe with a handful of the local brokers, but not all of them? That means it's possible, and I'd love to get someone from Zillow to do a radio show with us. That'd be great. But it's possible that, the coverage of listings will be spotty. So if you're reliant on Zillow for the sake buyer leads, and as we go into the spring, which is, obviously it's going to be happening in April, a lot of agents, if that does happen, if Zillow is not able to replace all of their relationships, which I don't know if it's possible that they can, but if they're not able to do that, what does that mean to an individual practitioner's business? I mean, Julie, we deal with this on a coaching level every day. Agents who are just basically locked into this paradigm of buying leads. I'm fearful for them, and that's really what motivates.
Absolutely. If you're overly dependent, definitely they're at risk, because I was just rereading one of these points. Brokers who wish to continue providing their content to Zillow must establish their own agreements and technology solution to support any future relationship with Zillow. So I wonder how many brokers across the country even know that fact, that that's what they're supposed to be doing if they want to continue that relationship with Zillow. So, I mean, statistically, I'm not sure that it can be recreated. Just the sheer numbers seem crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, obviously. So, Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had some additional thoughts as well. You mentioned something a moment ago that I'm not sure about. Is Zillow obligated to remove those ListHub listings from their database when this agreement expires? Or do those listings stick around and get stale? And then if they get stale, do they have any obligation to remove them over time? Because, I mean, I would imagine, I might be incorrect about this, but, Zillow has so much data in this database that they may not even be completely sure where it all comes from. Maybe all mixed together, So what we do know is they've already got, all of these, hundreds of thousands or millions of listings in this database. And those listings on a day-to-day basis, they age as the properties get sold, they get taken off the market, this, that, and the other thing, So that data is always aging, but in the past, it's always been refreshed from ListHub. Now, when that ListHub feed quits, either they're required to pull some X number, right, several 100,000 or more listings out of their database, which they may not be able to do, or else those listings basically just become kind of like ghost listings where they stay in there, but then they're no longer being refreshed. And that would mean that it's possible that Zillow data could become incredibly inaccurate over a period of just a few months.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. If they're going to basically try to replace the ListHub feed with direct feeds from agents, brokers and MLSs, and they're trying to form all these individual relationships, then the question becomes, how do they police the quality of the content that's getting loaded up to their website from these various feeds? I mean, we know from interviewing Celeste Starchild from ListHub before that that's something that they really make great strides to do, is make sure the data that they're syndicating to all their customers, Zillow having been one of them, is accurate, And that's been something I know that's been a real focal point in the industry, making sure that listing data on the MLS is correct. Now, agents know that if you put up a listing, and this kind of touching on the challenge that a lot of agents have with Zillow and Truly in particular, is that they're getting leads or buyer calls and, from buyers asking about listings that are no longer for sale. I mean, that's one of the things you hear a lot of folks complaining about, a lot of agents complaining about, is that they're having to essentially explain to their potential customers that, well, that house has not been for sale for a long time, or it's just not it's now pending, whereas before, all that type of thing. So I would imagine the policing, Tim, and you're the one that's the technology guy, but I would imagine, how could you possibly, with getting all these various feeds from all these, many different sources, tracking all that, putting a uniform system in place to control the quality of that data? The word impossible comes to mind. That was the advantage of basically getting a majority of your data from ListHub. They were in charge of that. That was their, that is their purpose, is to really do a great job of choosing who they're going to share the data with, as far as who their customers are going to be, and making sure the data is accurate. Tim, from a technological standpoint, I can't imagine what a challenge that is. That's got to be crazy.
Well, Tim, I'll tell you, in terms of maintaining a database of this size, it's likely that Zillow does track where all of those leads come from, and they may even have a relatively decent way to track, how stale those leads potentially are. But, without having incoming data to refresh that, I think that these accuracy issues that many have accused Zillow of will just get worse over time. And then I think it also brings up a lot of other questions. One of the questions that I have when we were working with Move on this story, and we have to wait to ask Celeste directly about this, is Zillow has just completed a merger with Trulia. That was just approved. So you have two different databases that more or less belong to the same company. Now, is Trulia going to continue getting updated with ListHub data? And then if so, is there some kind of permeability between these two data sets, or are you going to have the same company relying on data from two different places? It gets very, very complicated very rapidly. And in a sense, it gets kind of scary because now you have what used to be a relatively clean stream of data that had the occasional error here and there, had the occasional problem here or there. Now it's you've got listings coming from everywhere, and who knows how fresh any of this data is, I suppose.
Well, so, this is all relevant stuff, but again, this is Real Estate Coaching Radio, so we have to make this relevant to agents, brokers, MLSs, and all of our customers. Julie, I'm wondering, from a coach's perspective, this kind of goes back to the drumbeat that we've been, focused on since, forever, 7-8 years. You got to learn to, generate your own leads. You got to list the last. You have to really accept the fact that the days of being able to, again, I know some of you don't like it when I say this, oh, Tim, we're not buying buyer leads, we're buying impressions, and I respect your stance, but the reality of it is at the end of the day, you are buying leads, okay? And listen, guys, there's a flip side to this, and like I said, I'm really hoping to get a representative from Zillow. Spencer's been on the show before, years ago, and it was called Superstar Interviews. I'm hoping I can get him back on, the CEO of Zillow. But it's possible that Zillow has been preparing themselves and are further along in making up for the potential losses from the ListHub expiration than any of us know. We'll find out in April. But we're kind of, our minds are going to, what do we have to, how can we prepare agents in the event that they aren't able to make up for the lost listings? How can you guys as individual practitioners, if you are still dependent on buying buyer leads, how can you prepare yourselves so that, frankly, you're not taken out of the industry yourself because you don't have business coming in? So, Julie, what are the thoughts that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts that come to mind, but most primarily that you should do an assessment of just how dependent or not dependent you are on this type of paid-for lead system, so you can tell yourself how closely you need to be paying attention to this. That's on one level, is, don't be hiding out thinking the story's going to go away, because clearly it's not. Then the next question is, what are you supposed to do about it? So a smart agent decides how many listings they need to drive their business and looks at where their listings are going to come from. Now, we know as coaches and as people who have sold a ton of real estate that each listing should spin you off at least one more listing in the neighborhood, if not a whole handful or more of buyers. I was just on a coaching call with an agent, and we're calling her open houses block parties now because she's getting so many people to her own self-generated open houses, and she's definitely getting listing leads from that. So become your own listing lead generator is really your hedge against any of these things biting you, essentially. And how do you do that? Well, you utilize things like 1-800-HOME hotline, where you're generating leads from your own sign. I think that what we might see is more traffic to agent individual sites and broker sites. Remember, back before we had all of these online sources, you could search for, you could type in, I'm looking for a home in Atlanta, and agent names would pop up, brokers' names would pop up first before you'd see Zillow and Trulia and a million other sites who are trying to be Zillow and Trulia, et cetera. So I think the byproduct of this is going to be better traffic to agent signs, open houses, self-generated marketing, just listed, just sold types of cards, et cetera, and their own websites, their own Facebook. All of those things probably will be more powerful because now agents can say, I am the hub for accurate data in our marketplace.
Right.
You don't need to go to those other places.
You said 1-800-HOME-hotline.com. Well, so that would be a great source for getting your own leads off your own signs. But, right. But Julie, a lot of these guys, and you know this is true, a lot of these guys don't know how to, or at least not consistently take listings. And a lot of agents are coming to us. Well, isn't it? I mean, a lot of agents are coming to us. A majority of agents. We did a story the other day on Inman, talking about, hey, are you burned out on working with buyers? Learn how to become a listing agent.
Mm-hmm.
And people love that story. And what really surprised me is a lot of the points that we talked about. They weren't that they weren't that. Yeah, they were good points, but they weren't great.
But every agent can figure it out. It's not like rocket science, really.
Right. So help me understand, Julie. What's the mindset of an agent who's, they want to work listings, but they haven't learned how to work listings yet? Because, guys, you got to be clear in your heads. That's the best part of this industry. Working listings, becoming a listing agent. Here's just a little quick thought for you, okay? It's what we call the real estate magic number. It's worth talking about. It's worth understanding and embrace this. Every one of you have a magic number, and that magic number is simply the number of listings that you need at all times. Now, I'll make it real simple. For the most part, if in many markets, if you had 5 listings at all times or 10 listings at all times, let's just work off the number 10. And let's assume that your average sale price in your market is $200,000 because that's the average sale price more or less in the United States. So if you had 10 listings at all times and the average sale price is $200,000, and let's say the average commission is whatever it is in your particular market, let's say 5 or 6%, whatever the average is, might be 7%, might be 4%. You'll have to know what your number is. But we know that the reality of it is that every single month you're going to have a certain number of homes sell. They're priced right. They're in the MLS. You're not necessarily dealing with a lot of just normal, good, ordinary sellers, not distressed, not anything, just normal sellers. Hopefully you guys have all been blessed with a lot of those listings. You know as well as I do, in every market across the country, you'd have 2 to 3 houses sell per month. So if you had 10 active listings at all times, the average sale price is $200,000, and you had 2 to 3 sell per month, let's just say 3. In most markets, that would mean before broker splits or anything, but gross commission-wise, you'd be making close to $20,000 at all times. Now, some of you, I'm thinking of all of our friends on the East Coast, all of our coaching clients in California, where your average sale price is $700,000 or $800,000. I have coaching clients in New York whose average sale price is $2.5 million. Well, you don't have to have 10 listings at all times. If you had 3 listings at all times and you had 1 sell per month, well, you guys can do the math on that too. I mean, just think about that. For all of you in the Midwest, we have clients who literally have to sell, 5 or 6 houses per year, and they're making $750,000, $850,000. Know your market, know what your average, or know what your magic number is. Again, the magic number is the number of listings you need at all times, knowing that once you have those listings, that on average you'll have, let's say, 10 or 20% sell out of the MLS every month. In other words, they'll sell co-op. All you do is focus then on replacing what sells. You get it? So your magic number, really the pathway for everything you're looking for in this industry. You're looking for freedom. You're looking for control. You're looking for predictable, duplicatable income. It all comes from building and then maintaining a certain number of listings at all times. If you guys need any help with understanding that concept or figuring out what your own magic number is, of course, go to freecoachingcallsforagents.com, freecoachingcallsforagents.com. So, Julie, let's get back on this. Help me understand. Help the listeners understand. Those who are on the fence, who would love to become listing agents, why is it that it seems so hard for so many of them to embrace the concept?
Well, I think there's a lot going on. A lot of it is a mindset issue. I think it starts with the fact that not every agent that each agent knows is a great listing agent. There are fewer great listing agents than there are buyer's agents, so they're literally not exposed to it in the same way they are driving buyers around, going to open houses, doing the buyer thing, right? So the second thing is many agents think, well, I'm okay taking listings of my friends and family, but gosh, if I have to compete for a listing, I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that at that level. I'm not sure, if somebody puts me on the spot and says, what makes you different? Why should I list with you versus whoever? Why would they choose me? I mean, if it's my friend or my cousin, they already know, love, and trust me, but what if I have to be up against maybe 2 or 3 other agents, which is also probably why I'm not as good at my lead follow-up as I should be. And it's probably why I don't do things like maybe outgoing calls, otherwise known as prospecting. Maybe I don't even market that much because I'm afraid of what it might create because I'm not sure how to answer that question, what makes me different.
So it's fear of competing is what I hear you say.
And it's fear of success, really, fear of competing and fear of success. I see this when agents over pre-qualify a seller. They're getting close. The seller doesn't know them, and they ask, what price do you think your home is worth? And the seller says $350, but they know it's $300. Well, they immediately rationalize, well, I didn't want that listing anyway because the seller's overpriced, without asking, using a nice, tight seller pre-qualification script that leads to the listing presentation, not to mention the pre-listing package. Things like $350, that's interesting. How did you arrive at that price? And then figuring out if they have to sell, maybe they priced that off their neighbor's house out of market ignorance, and you can still list it at, say, $299 where it should be, but they over pre-qualify because they're looking for reasons for it not to work out, which costs money in the long run.
And Julie, you always say, and this is a good point, that working with buyers is physical labor, working with sellers is mental labor. What do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Well, working with buyers, literally it's physical labor because you're out there. It's in some cases harder labor than others, right? But you're out there physically driving around. You're using your navigation. You're, burning up lots of gas, fiddling with lockboxes all day long. So it is really physical labor when you think about it. Then listings, it is absolutely mental power, right? It's mental labor. Why? Because you have to be able to generate the lead in the first place, know how to follow up, pre-qualify, do a great listing presentation, handle objections, know how to close, and then you also have to deal with actually having the listing. I get this question all the time. Well, what if I actually get that listing? What am I supposed to tell the seller I'm going to do to sell it? So you've got to have a listing plan of action. There's, one thing leads to the next, and it causes a lot of mental work power to happen. And I think that some agents just, maybe they don't recognize what it is they have to do, which is where coaching comes in. But also it's, fear of success. What if I had to do that? What if I actually have to deal with, for some agents, it's sellers at all. But for a lot of agents, they'll say, well, gosh, I'm used to having 2 or 3 listings at the same time, but you're asking me to get to 10. How do I manage all that business? So there's a lot of mental turmoil that happens, but I think if listeners listen to one of the previous shows about becoming a great listing agent, they'll realize that listings are the key to happiness. The more listings you have, the more time you have, the more leverage you have, the more income you have. Julie, you're a self-generating machine. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something interesting, and I think we should probably wrap the show. And guys, remember, we're going to have Celeste Starchild from ListHub, and we're going to have hopefully a lot of great questions for her tomorrow. A lot of clarifications that Move wanted to get out about what actually transpired with the expiration of the Zillow ListHub agreement. But Julie, I think it's really important too, and this probably is maybe, at the end of the day, guys, if you get this next concept, you are going to forever have your perspective on real estate change. And here it is. Write this in your notes, please. I know a lot of you guys are listening to us on mobile, so just get this really clear in your head. When you're focused on all the different types of folks you can work with in the real estate business, and you're thinking about buyers, and sure, obviously buyers buy properties all the time, but the problem ultimately with working with buyers, and a lot of you guys have experienced this, and this is what burns you out, this is what frustrates you, is that there's no such thing as a buyer that has to buy. In other words, a buyer can always rent, and that's oftentimes what they do. Faced with just a little bit of a headwind, too much competition, rise in the interest rate, stress at home, stress at work, the holidays, what do they say? We'll just stay put. We're going to extend the lease, or we're going to not sell the house. We're going to, in essence, not do a transaction regardless of how much time, energy, and oftentimes money you've already spent on helping them, basically find a home. Julie, could you describe to the listeners what the difference between a buyer is that always will want to buy versus a seller that has to sell? Help them understand, because that is the essence of why sellers are always gold.
That's right, and sellers are gold. This is one of the reasons why it is harder to be a great listing agent, because there are sellers who absolutely positively have to sell. Underline the words have to, not just want to sell. Sellers that have to sell, getting divorced. The divorce decree says you will be selling the house. Getting relocated. You want your new job? Guess what? You got to move from city to city, and chances are they have to sell their home, especially as you go up market, because keeping it as a rental doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the relocating executive. People who can no longer afford the payment, they're going to be short sale or foreclosure. Keeping the house is not an option. You can't say that about buyers, because buyers, no matter what the price range or the situation is, every single buyer can either live with mom and dad, or their kids in some cases, or they can just rent, period. I'm hearing more from even amongst executive relocation where maybe they're only going to be there for 8 or 12 months for that particular part of their job, and they're being advised to rent. So even in some of the cases that sound that motivated, you want listings. Look at it this way, Tim. If you had to choose 10 active, really ready to rumble, good quality buyers or 10 have-to-sell sellers, which would you rather have?
Well, every agent knows the answer to that question, don't they? I mean, so guys, that's really the bottom line. If you look at all the transactions that you've ever closed, you look at all the sellers that you've ever worked with, and let's just say you've been on the buyer side for at least 80% of them, and you do know the motivation of the sellers, you're going to find that a vast majority of the ones that sold were selling because they had to. Now, there are going to be some exceptions, the flippers who are doing it for profit, and there's things of that nature, but a vast majority of the transactions out there, the listings that successfully sell because the sellers have to sell. They have to sell. They don't want to sell. The ones that burn us out, obviously, as agents are the ones that say, if I can get my price, when pigs fly, those types of unmotivated sellers, be on the lookout for those. But the ones that actually result in a closed transaction 9 times out of 10 are the ones that have to sell. Okay, just to review, guys, whatever happens with Zillow and ListHub and Zillow's own access to data and all the rest of this, corporate high-level wranglings, it does relate directly to your business, because if you're one of these, hundreds of thousands of agents that are still dependent on buyers or buying buyer leads, you really have to check yourself on that, because there's really good reasons to believe that the viability of building a business, let alone maintaining a business, from bought buyer leads is going to quickly evaporate. I strongly encourage every single one of you to at least seriously consider becoming a listing agent. What would it mean to your life? What would it mean to your cash flow? What would it mean to your stress level? What would it mean to your family life if you knew that because you'd reached your magic number of listings that you had consistent cash flow? At that point, and you know what, in many cases, this is where a lot of our coaching clients do when they reach their magic number, is they choose only to work with the buyers that are the sellers of their listings. They don't want to work with buyers anymore. They want their weekends back. Guys, this is your choice. That's the beauty of this industry. That's the beauty of being a realtor right now, is the fact that we are at the very beginning stages of what's going to be a long-term real estate boom. And you need to decide what you want your business to look like. A lot of people think that they have to, essentially do their personal life around their business. You don't have to live like that. Have your business work to enforce your personal life, not the other way around. I mean, isn't that the whole point of being your own boss, essentially to have a better life? A lot of you guys sacrifice too much. You give up too much for the sake of essentially what? Chasing buyers? Seriously consider using this as your opportunity. The fear of what might come or might not come because of what we've been, this breaking news that we shared with you today, really reach down deep and ask yourself, why is it that I'm hesitant to actually break the bond of buying buyer leads? And what do I have to do now to focus on actually becoming a listing agent? Julie, anything else you'd like to say to these guys?
Yeah, I have one thought for them. You got to go on vacation tomorrow. You got 10 buyers wanting to see property, or you have 10 listings. Who's going to have the more fun vacation? Who's going to actually be able to go on vacation? Just a thought. And I got to run to a coaching call. I think you do too, Tim. So
I do.
Guys.
So everyone,
it's possible to change it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, great, guys. So thanks. There's your breaking news for today. We're going to have Celeste Starchild from ListHub on tomorrow, so make sure you tune in. In the meantime, if you need us for anything, obviously go to timandjulieharris.com, or if you need a free coaching call, we encourage you to request one at freecoachingcallsforagents.com. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk with you on the radio tomorrow.
This program has been a presentation by Tim and Julie Harris, Real Estate Coaching. For more information on our real estate coaching and training programs, visit our website at timandjulieharris.com. Remember to tune in weekdays at noon for upcoming shows, and until next time, thank you for listening to Real Estate Coaching Radio with Tim and Julie Harris.